It surprised me to no end. One chat at the age of 11 brought my entire universe crashing down. With sullen expressions, my parents sat me down in our living room. "Dakota, we need to talk," Dad said in an unusually calm voice. I used to think that anything couldn't be right. My stomach contorted into a ball. Mom inhaled deeply. "Your father and I are getting divorced." The words felt like a kick to the stomach. Separated. But they were always kind to one another and never got into arguments. Yes, our family hadn't gone on any recent trips, but divorce? How come? Why? Tears were gathering in my eyes as I stuttered. Father cleared his throat. "We've both found other people we want to be with." I resisted Mom's hand as she sought for mine. "My love, you'll always have both of us in your life. You'll just coexist with each of us on an as-needed basis." The days that followed were a haze. I observed my father packing his belongings and placing fragments of our shared life into cardboard boxes. Mom busied herself painting as though it would be simpler without Dad's presence. The day Mom's new spouse moved in after that arrived. He showed up with a couple of years younger than me and a truckload of furnishings. "Dakota, this is Tom and his daughter, Lily," Mom said, sounding overly excited. I mustered a grin, hoping that things wouldn't turn out too badly. It may be enjoyable to have a sister. Lily gave me a long, hard stare as her lips quivered slightly in sneer. She said, "Nice to meet you," but her tone didn't seem kind. I made an effort to get along with Lily the following day. I suggested showing her my favorite toys and books. Her eyes rolled. "Let's be clear about one thing. We are not sisters, and we will not become friends. You simply get in the way." Over the course of the days, I observed Mom adoring Lily. She even gave her some of my old toys and bought her new clothes, all while showering her with praise. I heard Mom and Tom talking about schools one evening. "We should enroll Lily in Westbrook Academy," Mom added. "It's the best in the area." "What about Dakota?" Tom inquired. After a little silence, Mom answered, "Dakota is doing well at her present school. Lily, she's really talented. She requires further difficulty." With those words still ringing in my mind, I slunk back to my room. I was fine. Lily was talented. Weeks became months, and I felt more and more like an outsider. As Mom and Tom built their idyllic little family, I felt like the outsider. The time has finally come for me to see my father. I was anxious and excited at the same time as I packed my suitcase. Maybe at his new house, things would be better. Dad drove me home in uneasy quiet after picking me up in his car. Sarah, Dad's new wife, met us at the door. She had long blonde hair, an artificial grin, and was younger than Mom. "Greetings, Dakota," she said, sounding too upbeat. "I hope you'll be comfortable here." I nodded, at a loss for words. The scent of incense and strange spices filled the space. Sarah showed me to a little room that would be assigned to me when I visited. Sarah was in the kitchen making some sort of tea the following morning. She said, "Want to try some? It's a unique Tibetan combination. Incredibly spiritual." I grudgingly took a drink. It had an odd and unpleasant flavor. My throat burned and itched for a few minutes. I started coughing and had trouble breathing. "Dad." Panic swelling in my chest, I gasped. "Sarah." Her eyes grew wide. "Oh, stop being so dramatic. It's just tea." But my coughing would not go away. I started to feel like I was drowning on dry land as my eyesight became fuzzy. "Sarah, call an ambulance." Dad screamed, his voice muffled and far away. "She's faking it." Sarah persisted. "Dakota, this attention-seeking behavior needs to stop." I was unable to reply as everything around me was turning black. The next thing I recall is waking up with an oxygen mask on my face in a hospital bed. Dad was standing there, frightened and looking pale. He said, "You experienced a severe allergic reaction." The doctor said, "They said if we'd waited any longer." Though he didn't have to, he didn't complete the phrase. Sarah didn't believe me, and that's why I'd nearly died. After I got out of the hospital, we went back to Dad's apartment. Sarah stood there, waiting, her arms folded. "It would be ideal if Dakota moved out of here," she stated icily. "She's too problematic." I glanced at my father, thinking he would stand up for me. But instead, he simply remained silent and defeated. There was silence on the way back. I expected Dad to say he was sorry and that he would put things right, but he didn't say anything. I entered the home without bothering to bid Dad farewell. Mother hardly raised her gaze from her magazine. "You're back, Dakota," she murmured, getting somewhat irritated. Without a word, I closed the door and headed to my room. I had no idea how to make things better, and I was really alone. The following several weeks passed in a fog of uncertainty and loneliness. Lily harassed me at home, smashing my belongings and accusing me of being the cause. She unintentionally knocked over a vase one day, causing water and flowers to spill all over the floor. "Mom, Tom," was her cry. "Dakota broke your favorite vase." Tom barged in before I could protect myself. He glared at me. "That's it, young lady. Enter your room. No reimbursement for the damages this month." I turned to face Mom, silently begging her to believe me, but all she could do was shake her head, her disappointment obvious. I had to find a way out as I sat in my room, with tears flowing down my cheeks. That's when I thought about Dad's mother, Grandma. She had always been nice to me, lived alone, and worked as a professor at the nearby college. She might be able to assist. Grandma's house was like stepping into another world. The moment I walked through her door, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Her house smelled of old books and freshly baked cookies. It was cozy, filled with overstuffed chairs and shelves upon shelves of books. "How about we have some tea and you tell me what's been going on?" Grandma suggested, leading me to the kitchen. For the first time in months, I felt safe enough to let it all out. I told her everything. The divorce, Mom's new family, Dad's abandonment, the incident at his apartment. Grandma listened patiently, her kind eyes never leaving my face. When I finished, she reached out and squeezed my hand. "Oh, Dakota, I'm so sorry you've been going through all this alone. You can come here whenever you need to. My door is always open to you." From that day on, Grandma's house became my refuge. I started spending more and more time there. We cooked together, work in her garden, and best of all, read books from her vast collection. One evening, as we sat in her study, Grandma asked, "How are your grades, Dakota?" I shrugged. "Okay, I guess. Mom's more focused on Lily's schoolwork these days." Grandma's eyes narrowed. "Well, that won't do. How about I help you with your studies?" And so began our after-school tutoring sessions. Grandma, it turned out, was an amazing teacher. She made even the dullest subjects come alive with stories and real-world examples. As the weeks passed, I found myself staying over at Grandma's more often. At first, it was just weekends. Then it became a few nights a week. Before I knew it, I was practically living there full-time. The strange thing was, neither Mom nor Dad seemed to notice. When I did go home, Mom would ask absently, "Oh, were you at your father's?" And on the rare occasions I saw Dad, he'd assume I'd been with Mom. It was during one of these visits to Grandma's that things came to a head. I came home from school to find Grandma looking worried. "Dakota," she said, her voice serious. "There were some people from the guardianship service at your school today." My heart raced. "What? Why?" Grandma sighed. Your teacher, Mrs. Johnson, went to your mother's house to discuss moving you to a class for gifted children. When she asked where you were, your mother said you were living with your father. Mrs. Johnson then called your father, who said you were living with your mother. She realized neither of them knew where you actually were. I sank into a chair, my legs suddenly weak. What's going to happen now? The guardianship service has allowed you to stay with me for now, Grandma explained, but they're going to file a lawsuit to determine your official place of residence. That night, as I lay in bed at Grandma's house, I could hear her on the phone, her voice low and intense. She was fighting for me. I realized for the first time in a long while, someone was putting me first. The courtroom was intimidating, all polished wood and stern faces. I saw Mom and Dad sitting on opposite sides, neither meeting my eyes as I took my seat. I couldn't help but remember my friend Jessie, whose parents had divorced last year. They had fought tooth and nail over who would get custody, both desperate to have Jessie live with them. The judge, a stern-looking woman with glasses perched on her nose, called the hearing to order. We're here today to determine the living arrangements for Dakota Miller, she announced. What happened next was like something out of a nightmare. Instead of fighting over me, my parents started fighting to get rid of me. She should live with her mother. Dad shouted, his face red. I've got a new family now. We don't have room for her. Mom jumped to her feet, her voice shrill. Oh, no, you don't. I have a life too, you know. I can't be expected to take care of her full-time. I sat there, stunned, as my parents argued about who didn't want me more. Tears burned in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing how much they were hurting me. The judge's gavel came down hard. Order. She shouted, silencing my bickering parents. She turned to me, her eyes softening slightly. Dakota, I'm very sorry you're going through this. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. That's when I heard a chair scrape behind me, and Grandma's voice rang out clear and strong. Your Honor, she said, standing tall despite her age, if I may speak. The judge nodded, and Grandma continued. It's clear that neither of Dakota's parents are willing or able to provide her with the home she deserves. I am her grandmother, and I am more than willing to take full custody of her. She approached the bench, handing over a stack of documents. These papers show that I am financially stable. I'm a professor at Westfield College with a good salary and substantial savings. More importantly, I love Dakota and want to give her the stable, loving home she needs. The judge looked over the papers, nodding slowly. Then she turned to me. Dakota, you're 14 now, old enough to have a say in this decision. Who would you like to live with? I stood up, my legs shaking slightly. I looked at Mom and Dad, seeing the relief in their eyes at the prospect of being rid of me. Then I turned to Grandma, who smiled encouragingly. I want to live with my grandmother, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. The judge nodded. Very well, given the unusual circumstances of this case and the clear wishes of the child, I'm granting full custody to Mrs. Eleanor Miller, with visitation rights for the parents if they so choose. Living with Grandma was like stepping into a warm bath after being out in the cold. We fell into a comfortable routine. Gardening in the mornings, studying in the afternoons, and baking cookies in the evenings. Under her care, I flourished. My grades improved, I made new friends at school, and slowly the pain of my parents' rejection began to fade. The years flew by, and before I knew it, I was standing in my cap and gown, diploma in hand. The journey to this moment had been long and sometimes difficult, but as I searched the crowd of proud parents and beaming relatives, I only had eyes for one person, Grandma. There she was in the front row, her eyes shining with tears of joy. She stood out among the younger parents, but to me, she was the most beautiful person there. As I walked across the stage, I heard her loud cheer. That's my girl. The absence of my parents was a dull ache, but one I'd grown used to. They hadn't called on my birthdays, hadn't asked about my college plans, and hadn't shown any interest in my life at all. But looking at Grandma's proud face, I realized I didn't need them. I had all the family I needed right here. Thanks to Grandma's unwavering support and my own hard work, I not only graduated with honors, but also secured a full scholarship to Westfield College, one of the best in the state. I was going to study investment management, a field that fascinated me with its blend of mathematics, psychology, and strategy. The next 3 years were a whirlwind of classes, study sessions, and new experiences. I threw myself into college life, joining clubs, making friends, and excelling in my studies. Grandma was always there, a phone call away, ready with words of encouragement or a care package full of her famous cookies. I was in the middle of my junior year when I got the call that changed everything. Grandma had passed away in her sleep. The world seemed to stop spinning for a moment as the news sank in. The following days were a blur of grief and responsibilities. I took charge of organizing the funeral, determined to give Grandma the send-off she deserved. As I made arrangements and wrote the eulogy, I was struck by how many lives she had touched. The day of the funeral arrived, and the church was packed. The mayor was there, along with several city council members, all former students of Grandma. Famous authors and respected academics filled the pews with a story about how Grandma had inspired or helped them. As I stood to deliver the eulogy, my eyes scanned the crowd one last time. Despite a small foolish hope, I knew I wouldn't see them. My parents hadn't come. They couldn't even be bothered to show up for the woman who had raised their daughter when they wouldn't. Eleanor Miller was more than just my grandmother. I began, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat. She was my guardian, my teacher, my biggest supporter, and my best friend. After the service, as I accepted condolences from the long line of mourners, I thought about calling my parents, about screaming at them for their absence, for their years of neglect. But as I looked around at all the people whose lives Grandma had touched, I realized something. My parents' absence said more about them than it ever could about me or Grandma. 2 weeks after Grandma's funeral, I was called to the notary office. As I walked in, my heart skipped a beat. There, sitting on opposite sides of the room, were my parents. They nodded curtly at me, not even bothering to ask how I'd been. The air was thick with tension and unspoken words. The notary, a balding man with kind eyes, cleared his throat. "Shall we begin?" he asked, looking around the room. As he started reading Grandma's will, I felt a sense of unreality wash over me. To my beloved granddaughter, Dakota Miller, I leave my entire estate, including my house and all my savings, amounting to $1 million. The room fell silent for a moment, then erupted into chaos. "What?" my father shouted, his face turning red. "That's impossible. I'm her only son. She can't just leave everything to Dakota." My mother chimed in, her voice shrill. "Surely there's some mistake. Eleanor could have at least left something for us. We're family too." I sat there, stunned. $1 million in the house. It was more than I could have ever imagined. The notary raised his hand, silencing my parents. "There's more," he said. "Mrs. Miller left a letter to be read at this time." He pulled out an envelope and began to read. "My dearest Dakota, if this letter is being read, it means I'm no longer with you. But please know that my love for you extends beyond this life. You are the daughter of my heart, the only one who truly cared for me in my final years. To my son and his ex-wife, I am deeply disappointed in the way you abandoned Dakota. A child is a blessing, not a burden to be cast aside when inconvenient. Your actions have shown me that you do not deserve to benefit from my life's work. I know this decision may upset you, but it is final and legally binding. Dakota, use this inheritance wisely. Build the life you deserve, the life I always knew you could have. All my love, Grandma. The room fell silent again, but only for a moment. Then my parents turned to me, their eyes suddenly friendly, their voices honey-sweet. Dakota, sweetie, my mother said, surely you'll share some of this with us. We're family after all. My father nodded eagerly. Yes, yes, let's discuss this reasonably. We can come to some sort of arrangement. But I was already walking towards the door. Thank you for your time, I said to the notary. I'll be in touch about the necessary paperwork. As I walked out, I could hear my parents' angry shouts behind me. But for the first time in years, their words couldn't touch me. Grandma had given me more than just money and a house. She'd given me the strength to stand on my own, to face the world without flinching. A few days after the will reading, my phone rang. I wasn't surprised to see my mother's number on the screen. With some hesitation, I answered. Dakota, sweetie, my mother's voice was syrupy sweet. It's been so long. We miss you terribly. Won't you come for dinner? I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Years of silence, and now, suddenly, they missed me. But curiosity got the better of me, so I agreed to come. The next evening, I found myself standing on the porch of my childhood home, a place that now felt alien to me. My mother opened the door, her face arranged in a mask of maternal joy. I noticed the tears in her eyes, carefully crafted for maximum effect. Tom, her husband, and Lily, my stepsister, stood behind her, pasting on smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. Throughout dinner, the conversation was strained. My mother kept bringing up how difficult things had been lately. The house is just falling apart, she sighed dramatically. The roof needs replacing, the plumbing is a nightmare, and poor Lily, she so wants to go to a good college. But with our finances, I pretended not to notice the pointed looks and unsettled hints. I asked about their lives, their work, feigning interest as they stumbled through responses, clearly unprepared for actual conversation. Finally, my mother turned to me, her eyes wide with false concern. And you, Dakota, how have you been? What have you been up to all these years? I smiled, deciding to test her. Oh, I've been doing well. I'm in my final year of college now. By the way, do you know where I'm studying or what I'm studying? The color drained from her face. Tom and Lily shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Well, that is, my mother stammered. It's okay, Mom, I said, my voice calm but firm. You don't need to pretend. I know you're not interested in me. You're interested in my inheritance. The facade crumbled instantly. My mother's face contorted with anger and embarrassment. Tom started to protest, while Lily muttered something under her breath. Now, Dakota, my mother began, her voice hard, that's not fair. We're family. We're just trying to reconnect. No, I cut her off, standing up. We're not family. Family doesn't abandon each other. Family doesn't ignore each other for years and then only reach out when there's money involved. I walked towards the door, their protests falling on deaf ears. As I walked out into the cool evening air, I heard their shouts behind me, but I didn't look back. With each step, I felt lighter, freer. I was standing at my father's door a few days after the terrible supper with my mother. The home was not as big as I had recalled, and parts of the paint were flaking. My dad answered the door with a surprised yet artificially kind expression on his face. As he ushered me in, he remarked, Dakota, it's good to see you. I met Sarah, my stepmother, inside. She greeted me with a brittle grin. Greetings, Coda. It has been a very long time. A tiny youngster with large inquisitive eyes peered out from behind Sarah's back. With a surprise, I realized he was my half-brother. He was a living example of how much time had passed. He was around 8 years old. My father introduced himself as Michael and tousled the young man's hair. "Hello, Michael. Say hello to your sister." Michael merely stared, obviously not understanding why I had suddenly entered his life. We were sitting in the living room having a difficult chat. My dad cleared his throat. "We've been thinking, Dakota. This Michael is really intelligent. He should go to Westbrook Academy, please. Though it's a reputable institution, the cost of tuition." This was heading somewhere I could see. I completed it for him, saying, "And you thought I might be willing to pay for it." Even my father could manage to seem humiliated. "You see, with your inheritance, well," I interrupted, getting impatient, saying, "Dad, why are you only now recalling me? Why didn't you give me a call on my birthday, when I entered college, or when I graduated from high school?" Sarah interrupted my father before he could respond, her tone acerbic. "Listen up now, young woman. We are related. You have a duty to assist us. We'll take you to court and seek our portion if you don't pay." I laughed because I couldn't help it. After gathering my thoughts, I responded, "Actually, we're not family by law. You two gave up on me. My legal guardian was my grandmother. Nothing is yours to claim." Anger swiftly replaced the color that had disappeared from their features. I turned to walk for the door as my father began to splutter. I glanced at Michael one more time before leaving. He was quite dejected and perplexed. I experienced a twinge of empathy for him. It was not his fault at all. My phone was incessantly beeping with calls and texts from my folks for the following 3 days. They attempted to intimidate me, they pleaded, and they threatened. My mother's letter about her potential homelessness as a result of indebtedness was extremely poignant. None of it got a response from me. Instead, I concentrated on my future goals and the impending graduation from college. Upon examining my bank statement and noticing the bequest from my grandmother, I experienced a feeling of accountability. This was my opportunity to truly impact the world and create the life my grandmother had always dreamed of for me. But my thoughts kept returning to Michael as I considered my future. All of this was innocent of him. He was just a child enmeshed in grown-up issues. Even though I had no desire to give my father or stepmother money, I couldn't help but wonder if there was any way I might support Michael going forward. It was something to think about. But for now, I had to carve out my own route. I was excited as I sat at my desk, looking at investment potential and employment opportunities. I could see the world as it had never been before.